ask better questions, you get better answers. But there's nowhere in a million years you'll be able to ask those really great what and how questions, such as, well, what was all that about? What did I miss? What's the learning here? What's the opportunity? What don't I know? How else could I look at this? You're never going to ask those questions when you're caught up in that adrenaline or cortisol wave.
Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I don't think I've ever been so nervous.
Really?
To interview someone, because I'm thinking, oh my God, what's he going to say? What's he going to get me to do? But no, in all seriousness, I'm very, very much looking forward to our conversation. I had the pleasure of spending a bit of time with you in Italy just a few months ago. But you have had probably some of the most challenging conversations that of anybody that I've certainly ever met has ever had. Over 300 kidnap-for-ransom crisis negotiation conversations and having to resolve them. I mean, as far as high-stakes conversations go, it doesn't get any higher than that, does it?
Well, if we messed up, people could die. So we tended to focus the mind a little bit on what worked, what didn't, how you can influence and persuade people who don't want to be influenced and persuaded. And so there's about 300 cases, 15 or so years. It was kidnap for ransom, extortion, both old school blackmail as well as cyber attacks, but piracy, etc. All those kind of high stakes conversations. And over those years and all those cases, it gave me a ringside seat into human psychology. What makes people think, feel, and act the way they do, particularly under times of stress, overwhelm, uncertainty, crisis, conflict, a bit like the world we're living in right now, you could argue.
So I'm going to ask the question that I think a lot of people will be thinking. Certainly, I think when we sat here like this, before we really go into the amazing career that you've had, do you always get what you want?
Wow, I do get asked that question a lot. And I think it depends on definitions. And this is not a politician's answer. It's, okay, the outcome of any negotiation is ideally cooperation and collaboration, right? Not a win-lose. Yes, you can get the deal over the line once or twice, play hardball, but ultimately, in, like say, the business context, if I want a long-term client, I'm going to have to try and look for cooperation and collaboration. But equally, in my relationships, in my personal life, I can't approach as a win-lose. I need to be constantly thinking, okay, how can each of us in this dialogue, in this relationship, walk away from this conversation feeling as if, you know, our needs have been met. We've got something from it. So that's kind of a long answer to your question is probably yes, because I see it as a cooperation and collaboration. Now, if you ask my other half or my kids, they may see it slightly differently, but I can safely say I look in the mirror thinking I gave it my best shot there.
Yeah, well, we're going to delve into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So let's go right back, because you started out, I believe I'm right in saying, working in the police, then spent 16 years at Scotland Yard. But where did that even prior to that? What did you grow up always wanting to be in the forces? What was the start of that?
Well, you know when you're at school and you have the chat with a careers advisor about what you want to do. Do you want to be a plumber, a train driver, a lawyer, whatever, kidnap negotiator? No, I mean that never came up for me either. And so I kind of did a couple of jobs to start with, and then I joined the police, moved to London, early 20s. And I just had the best career. I really loved it. Really super curious about people. Or, you know, I was one of those kids, like really nosy kids, like really inquisitive, always asking why. And the police, obviously I was paid to be super curious, particularly as a detective. And I did all the usual kind of detective roles, all the investigations and operations, and then specializing in human kind of intelligence gathering, so sources and agent recruitment and running, and then took a slight detour kind of halfway through that to work with the military to do some interrogation work out in Iraq, where our job was to question captured insurgents, people looking to blow people up, blow coalition forces up. And once they were detained, our job was to find out information from them. Not like in waterboarding and torture, as you see. It's not like that at all. We actually had lawyers and the Red Cross in every single session with us. But again, that was another insight into human psychology. And I was very fortunate that I had a big career there where I just had the opportunity to get inside people's minds, work out what made them tick, and then utilize that for the greater good.
So this is what I love. And when I help people find their North Star, we'll often find, I kind of call it the golden thread. What's the golden thread that's weaving between everything? And you said one word, which is curiosity. If you think about being a Scotland Yard detective in counterterrorism, doing the interrogation work, the human psychology component is just constantly being curious, I suppose, of understanding why people are doing what they're doing and really getting to the crux of that.
Yeah, I mean, curiosity is a superpower. And people talk about superpowers all the time, but it's genuinely a superpower in that I always say to people, whenever I go into companies and work with teams about training them to be better negotiators, it's you need to bring more curiosity than assumption to a conversation, because assumptions are like earplugs. They will just get in the way of you truly identifying and hearing and working out what is going on for the other side, what their problems are, what their challenges, what their issues, what their beliefs and values and rules are. Because you can't influence somebody unless you already know what influences them. And that takes a bit of time and a bit of thinking and a bit of preparation, and you taking a slight step back and realizing, seek first to understand before being understood. There's a reason that cliche has been around for so long, is because it's pretty darn true.
Yeah. So when it comes to what you've done now, obviously you've written 2 amazing books. You've got Order Out of Chaos, which was your first book, which was a Sunday Times bestseller. And then you've got Eye of the Storm, which is also a Sunday Times bestseller. What would you say it is that you actually help people do now?
Okay, right now, I take all of that learning or the insights or the tools and techniques that worked in pretty much every industry and sector all over the world. It doesn't matter what country I was operating in, Latin America, the US, Africa, Middle East, North Africa, Asia. Human beings are very, very similar. Yes, there's some slight nuances, some cultural shifts, but by and large, people think, feel and act very similar ways, particularly in times of uncertainty and overwhelm. And I mean, the first book took 4 years to write because I was busy doing the job. Second book took 9 months, but a legally binding contract kind of forces your hand there from the publishers. But I was doing this work, and then as I took a step from that line of work, when I stepped back from negotiating with kidnappers, I thought, God, there's just so much transferable, relevant tools, techniques, skills, insights that are super relevant to the business world. And somebody said, you need to write a book. And I'd spent 20 years in the shadows, so to speak. I wasn't one to kind of go on social media. But in the end, a friend of mine turned around and went, do you know what, Scott? That is really selfish of you. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, you've got all this knowledge, all this information, all these insights that could benefit people, whether on their personal lives, but particularly in business. And you've got to share that. Now, you haven't got to give away any kind of ultra secret things that you don't want to give, but just give the practical things that people can implement in their businesses, in their teams, to have ultimately better conversations, because that is what a negotiation is. People think, well, you know, I don't have negotiation in my job title, I don't do sales. People are missing a trick. They're misunderstanding there. Negotiation is simply a conversation with a purpose, where you're looking to influence and persuade or bring about cooperation and collaboration. The same principles, the same tools and techniques that help me negotiate with the most dangerous people on the planet are the same that help me build a great relationship with my teenage kids, that help me get some great business and work with some great clients and customers in my business as well. So now I take all of that and I give keynote talks and fireside chats. I run predominantly, and then I run negotiation workshops.
I love the distinction of negotiation is getting people to cooperate and collaborate, because the moment you make it those two words, it is everyday life, isn't it?
It is. You think people, I mean, we can talk about difficult conversations later if you like, which is a part of negotiation. But the way to look at it is, and an often used analogy is, rather than trying to get a bigger slice of a fixed size pie, work with your counterpart to just make a bigger pie. So everybody gets a bigger slice. And that way, as I said earlier, people must walk away from the conversation, the negotiation with you, feeling as if they've got something from it. Not necessarily the deal they wanted to. It's about, because if people feel they've left money on the table, metaphorically or literally, they're going to get buyer's remorse. They're going to be resentful. As sure as anything, I'm going to come back and think, do you know what? Will's got my best interests at heart here.
So this is what I think is really interesting when we think about it in the context of business, because most businesses are relationship businesses. You build a relationship, you want to keep a relationship. I think there's a lot to be said for the amount of businesses that their biggest cost isn't their staff, which most people think it is. It's the fact that their clients or customers haven't continued to stay working with them. They've been in business 10 years. Was your same client that was working with you on day one still working with you at the 10-year mark? So that I completely get. You want them to cooperate and collaborate over the long term. But let's look at some specific scenarios, because people are going to want to know the juicy moments. What was the first ever negotiation that you class as sort of a high stake negotiation? I appreciate high stake may, as in your career, have gone on, it felt less high stake than it was at the time, but your first real high stakes conversation.
Yeah,
what was that?
My first one was nearly my last one as well. I nearly had the shortest career in negotiation. Life's a great teacher, right? And so I got selected to do the job when I was in the police, and I get my first call. You know, I'm a young, keen, ambitious cop. You know, I've done the training, got the t-shirt. I think I'm Denzel Washington in Man on Fire. And I get the phone call at 2:00 in the morning. It's always 2:00 in the morning. It's never a Wednesday lunchtime when I've got a clear desk. I'm thinking, hey, I'll take a case now, everyone. So I get in the car, I put the blue light on the roof, the Kojak light, and I blast across London to this tiny apartment in East London. There's a family of 9 living there. And a few hours before, the youngest son had been kidnapped by a drugs gang. And then the parents were receiving some pretty unpleasant torture videos. I mean, it's a proof of life, but it wasn't particularly pleasant. And they were demanding some money from them. Basically, there was a bit of a drugs debt kind of gone wrong. And my job as a first person there was to sit with the family, reassure them, work with them to, okay, this is what we're going to say and why we're going to say it to get your loved one back. So it's really about navigating those high emotions. You can imagine walking into that family environment where their loved one is at risk. And so I'm doing that, working with the family about what we're going to say. And then meanwhile, the bad guys are phoning the mobile phone that the family are using to communicate. And they go, we know you're working with the police. And they gave the address. And they said, we're going to send some guys around with a Mac 10 machine gun to spray the place. And I'm thinking, I didn't sign up for this. And I speak to my colleague. I mean, mate, we're going to get shot to pieces here. We weren't armed. We didn't have any backup. And so, I mean, because usually these negotiations, they need to be quite secret, quite covert. And we definitely don't want people knowing that the police are involved. So, but in the end, we had to kind of break cover, and then we parked 2 big armed response Range Rovers outside the front with 6 heavily armed cops as a deterrent. And in any event, we had to carry on with the negotiation. And we wanted to move the family to a hotel suite in central London. So obviously we could control that more. But they were refusing to budge. They wanted to stay in there in this tiny, tiny apartment.
The family wanted to stay.
Family wanted to stay. But they weren't really listening to the advice that I was giving them. And I allowed my ego to take hold. I became emotionally dysregulated. And eventually I turned around to these poor suffering parents and I went, worse the effect of, what's wrong with you people? Why can't you just do what I tell you to do? And if you did, we'll get your son back. What's wrong with you? I mean, how do you think that went? Yeah, not well at all. And then I suddenly realized how this was panning out. And that is until my far more experienced colleague, who I'll call Yoda, just gently squeezed my shoulder. But that was enough to interrupt my pattern. And I took a step back. And then I just watched a masterclass in how to navigate and have these really difficult conversations. And eventually we managed to get the son back. But that example, that first case really showed so many things for me about how to negotiate and influence, persuade under pressure, regardless of the situation, even in business as well. Because actually dealing with the bad guys was the easy bit, because they're just businessmen looking for a good deal. 80% of my time on that case, and indeed on all of the others over the next 15, 20 years, was spent dealing with our own side. It's what we call the crisis within the crisis. So it's the family or it's the company, because it's the internal politics, the egos, the competing demands, the silo thinking. And for all the business owners and entrepreneurs watching or listening to this, I bet the actual clients and customers you work with are relatively straightforward. It'll be all the internal dramas and issues and problems that most people end up having to deal with. And that was a great insight into how you can develop what I call sensory acuity. Imagine you've got a radar dish on the top of your head and you're constantly scanning for mood, the emotions, what's really going on here below the surface. Because again, I learned in that first case, the number one skill of the world's best negotiators, regardless of the circumstances, is emotional self-regulation. You don't have that, you become dysregulated, then it just unravels completely.
So you talk about becoming emotionally dysregulated. I think of the terms fight and flight and rest and digest, or parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. There are times when clearly you're going to have adrenaline pumping through your body, cortisol pumping through your body. What are the practical things that you do in those high stakes environments to regulate so that you don't nearly blow up every conversation that you or negotiation you're dealing with?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there's some really practical tools that I learned the hard way, but then I've refined them over the years into like muscle memory, right? Emotional regulation, number one skill. But it's not about suppressing and denying these emotions. Far from it. It's being able to identify what are your hot buttons. What really triggers you is the word of the day, really, isn't it? And it's like you don't need a trigger warning. You just need to manage your triggers better. And what I mean by that is when I'll give you a scenario. Let me give you a scenario. So imagine you're stood on a riverbank, all right? And the water flowing in front of you, that's your emotions. And every so often, life will push you in the river. That's fine. You get yourself out, you dry yourself off, and you carry on with your day. It's no big deal. But occasionally, what happens? We get pushed in, and rather than getting ourselves out, we go for a swim. And then we get carried out to sea, and then we start drowning in the waves of overwhelm, etc. And that's not going to help us. So the practical things that I got taught early on was to observe, but don't absorb. Observe the emotions, whatever they are, but don't allow them to be absorbed. Because what happens is, you, like Steve did, the Yoda did in that first case of mine, he interrupted the pattern. So step one is interrupt the pattern. That could be if you're sat down and you're reading an email, or you see something on social media, or you're having a conversation with a client who's being a bit belligerent, just stand up and go outside, or take some breaths, or have a drink, whatever it is. But you need to interrupt that pattern so you don't start spiraling in that negative loop. So that's the first step. The second step is you're a snowboarder, okay? I'm sure you probably surf as well. It's about riding the wave. So step 2 is riding the wave. And the wave you're riding is the cortisol and the adrenaline that is pumping through your body. So when you've been activated, when your hot buttons are being pressed, you've got about 90 seconds in which your amygdala's taken over and it's pumping cortisol and adrenaline around your body. You can't stop that. That's just biological fact. But I don't know if it's just you, Will, but in those 90 seconds in the past, that's when I've said something I wish I could kind of get back, or I've pressed send on the text message or the email thinking, I want to kind of get that back. So it's ride the wave, don't do anything in those 90 seconds at least. And if it's keep going after 90 seconds, all that means is that you're replaying the story in your head. Okay, and that's a separate conversation really. But so once you've interrupted your pattern, once you've ridden the wave for 90 seconds, feel your feet on the floor, soles of your feet on the floor, observe but don't absorb, imagine you're on the riverbank, do some breathing exercises, whatever's your thing, and then you can move to step 3. Because once you're regulated, once you're balanced and grounded, then you can ask better questions. Ask better questions, you get better answers. But there's nowhere in a million years you'll be able to ask those really great what and how questions, such as, well, what was all that about? What did I miss? What's the learning here? What's the opportunity? What don't I know? How else could I look at this? You're never going to ask those questions when you're caught up in that adrenaline or cortisol wave. So I call that the immediate action drill, the IA drill. I talk about it in the first book. So it's interrupt the pattern, ride the wave, and then ask better questions.
I love that. I often talk about the difference between reacting and responding, which I think is basically the same thing that you've just said there. How many times have we had a situation where we've said something, days later, hours later, minutes later, years later, we go, I wish I hadn't said that. And it's being able to control that response in that moment. The bigger you can make that gap, then the more space that there is.
We call it buying time.
Yeah.
So the kind of the one saying we would use all the time is the purpose of a negotiation is to buy time, particularly when the stakes are high, because the more time you can buy, even if it's just a few seconds or minutes, let alone weeks, days or weeks, is it can allow the emotions to settle, more information and more data to be obtained, and then more time to build trust and rapport and relationships before you then move to problem solving. But certainly it can buy you that few seconds at least where you're right, you respond rather than react, and that's key.
So I'm genuinely curious from the perspective of the way that you operate. I know that trust is a big component. Whoever you're negotiating with has to feel that they can trust you in order to be able to cooperate, in order to be able to collaborate. I know that's, you talk about that being the golden thread that's kind of woven within it. Is your job in a negotiation to get the other party to trust you, or are you trying to trust them in certain things that they're saying for you to feel that they are being congruent when you're having those types of conversations?
Let me set it in the context of how a negotiation is made up. Negotiation is made up of 3 parts. First part, it's information gathering. It's about data, whether or not it's a business deal or a hostage negotiation or trying to do something in a family home. You're trying to gather data, trying to gather the information about what's this really about, what's the price point, deadlines, etc. That's relatively straightforward. That's where you're doing your preparation almost. But the second stage is relationship building. That is a part where you build the trust, and it has to be the biggest part out of the 3 elements of negotiation. And there's a reason why trust is the golden thread, and it's also the reason why there's a 93% chance that hostages come back from a negotiation. Not 100%, but don't forget, this is the most unregulated, ungoverned, dangerous industry in the world.
What do you mean by come back?
Get released. So,
right, okay, that's what you mean. So the hostage gets released.
So we will secure the release of hostages through a negotiation. There's a 93% success rate, and that's been like that for about 50 years.
Wow.
They're great odds because we spend the time building trust with people we have nothing in common with. We don't like. I sure as hell I'm not going to go for coffee or beer with kidnappers. I'm not going to talk about football with them. I'm not going to talk about anything other than the task at hand. So all these things you read about, yeah, find commonality and everything else. Whilst it can help to a certain degree, but that's not what trust is about. Trust, quite plain and simply, is you doing what you say you're going to do. And if I say I'm going to be available between 2 and 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to take your call, Mr. Kidnapper, I'm going to make sure I'm going to be available between 2 and 4 o'clock to take your call tomorrow. But equally works the other way. If on that call between 2 and 4 o'clock tomorrow, you said to me you're going to provide a proof of life that the hostage is okay, and you do, great, that's a tick in the box. If you don't, I'm actually going to push back. I'm not going to be afraid of conflict. Conflict is not a dirty word. Doesn't mean you need to be rude or unpleasant, but you don't have to be weak either. And so you're trying to find these little steps where both sides, counterparties, not just in hostage negotiation, but in business as well, where both sides can just demonstrate they follow through. But it's interesting, isn't it, how the bar for people to trust us, it's really, really low. Well, of course you can trust me, Will. I'm Scott. Why wouldn't you trust me? Whereas the bar to trust other people, it's sky high, right? People need to jump through hoops to kind of earn your trust. And so what I say to people is, it's a golden thread, but you also need to be trusting in order to be trusted as well.
So how do you, and I appreciate, I'm going to relate it to hostage negotiations, but people listening to this, it's going to be the business deal they're trying to get over the line, the lease they're trying to negotiate. I'll be happily go on record saying that I can be agreeable in lots of situations because of fear. And I will find myself saying things or doing things, some people might call it people pleasing, because I'm fearful that that person, if they don't do that, is going to give me more of what I don't want. So I whistle fear down to 2 things: getting something that I don't want or losing something that I do. And often it might be that I don't want to say that because they might go, oh, sod you, I'm going to go off and do whatever and not do. So then I've not got that. How do you navigate that component of, I suppose, pushing and pulling so that it doesn't go completely, but then you haven't given away the farm when it comes to a negotiation?
Yeah, it's worth remembering that the concept of loss aversion, particularly in negotiation in a business context, we will do more to avoid losing something than we will to get an equal gain. And if we can identify what is it that the other person will lose by not agreeing to us, for example, that can help in negotiation, but also it works the other way as well. What do we fear that we may lose by either us saying yes to this deal, or if we don't get this deal? And what I mean by that is people will only say yes and mean it if they know, like, and trust you. We know that from marketing. But also, they'll only say yes and mean it if saying yes increases their sense of identity and status in the world, about how they're perceived. So this fear thing, if we can understand, okay, how does this person see themselves in the world? Because a conversation, it's about, there's emotions. So there's the emotions, there's the logic, there's also the identity piece. And it's about status as well. And we really need to be able to spend the time working out, okay, but what's really driving this person? Where's the fear coming from? What do they fear missing out on? It's that room 101, so to speak. And if we can identify what that gap is, what that hole is that they're looking to fill, if we can provide that bridge for them to navigate from that place of fear, to maybe our solution, then that means they're more likely to say yes than not. So it's really about identifying that loss aversion piece for both ourselves and for the other person. For yourself there, if you're feeling that, actually I might just say yes just because I'm worried about what they may think of me or losing future opportunities, actually that is probably worth just spending time reflecting on, actually, well, how can I have maybe a difficult conversation with the other side and push for better terms? But because you realize, actually, I'm saying yes purely for a sense of appeasement, or because I don't like being this uncomfortable by coming back with a counter offer or counter proposal, then that's time well spent in examining that. Because on a kidnapping case, every single time we would have what is called the conflict call. Every single time. This is when the bad guys will say, okay, we want $10 million for Will. I'm sure you're worth $10 million, by the way. But your family will go, do you know what? We can probably get about $500,000, $750,000, that's it. So at some point, I'm going to have to tell the bad guys, I need to manage their expectations. You want 10 million, you're going to get probably $750,000. How are they going to react to that? Not particularly happy about it, and they start making threats, etc. So I know this is going to happen. So I need to have that conversation, pretty direct, to hold my boundaries, hold my red lines, and have that toe-to-toe conversation. And once we've gone through that, then we can start the negotiation proper. But that applies in business as well, and in people's personal lives. It's don't shy away from having those really difficult, challenging conversations, because actually once you can get to the other side of that, you're more likely to get a bit better deal for everybody.
So in years gone by, I used to work for a stock brokerage, and I first learned sales and NLP, frankly, to sell more. And there was some tactical stuff that you might label as manipulation and doing certain things. And then I went completely the other end of the spectrum, where I would just go into negotiations and go, look, I'm not going to mess around. I'm not going to play the game. Here is my bottom line. There is no negotiation from that. That's it. Take it or leave it type thing, which I found doesn't work that particularly well either. And the reason for that is I was trying to just get rid of all of the bollocks, frankly. I just couldn't be bothered to do all of the playing the game element of what's going on. So in a scenario that some people might be having, and let's just use that exact example. You've got 10 million. The family can get $1 million, let's just call it. Do you then go in and play the game of going, look, we can get you some money, but we can get you 200K and then work your way up to it? Is that something that people should be thinking about when it's looking at that type of situation, and then try and work up to it to try and maybe get a better deal? Or what? How do you handle that component?
Yeah, we would use a concept called decreasing increases. So every increase we would make, so we'd say the target was $1 million, and our initial offer would be, let's say, 500,000. And then our next one might be 225,000, and the next one might be 175,000. The next one may be 50,000. So we would decrease the increases each time. And what that does, it signals to the other side where this is likely to end up. The same works in business. If you can signal to the other side where it's likely to go, it's really clear. And actually, depending on the industry sector or geography you're working in, you might need to do more of that than others. For example, there's a client I had, it was a financial institution, but it'd been around for like 300 years. So quite very old school, traditional in its approach. And I realized after the first conversation with them in the scoping call, saving face was a big thing. The appearance of being in control was a big thing for this client. And so I knew full well, no matter, even if I came out with the best deal, the best offer on the table, they would need to feel as if they'd quote unquote won. They'd saved a bit of face by asking for a reduction. It was peanuts in the scheme of things. But because I knew what was going to happen, and when they came back with trying to shave a tiny margin off it, I was like, yeah, that's fine. Because I knew it was about the cooperation and collaboration. It wasn't worth dragging out, having a fight over something that I knew was actually, all they wanted to do was to save face. And so what I say to people now is, work out the underlying, I said, the identity and the need, what is below the surface, what's really driving the other side, as opposed to just the surface level stuff.
And that makes perfect sense. But how does someone do that?
The really technical Jedi tricks to do this is actually something called listening.
Oh, how do you do that?
Because most people, myself included at times, we overestimate our ability to listen properly. And I talk about it in the book, in the first book as well. We want to get to level 5 listening. Level 5 listening. Okay, so you start at level 1, which is you're just listening for the gist of what they're saying. You know, you and I could be talking here, but actually I'm thinking about lunch or about an Amazon delivery I'm having this afternoon or whatever else it is. Or maybe move down to levels 2 and 3 where I'm just listening to rebut or just looking for the logic in what you're saying so I can actually prove that I'm right and you're wrong. And so I'll let you finish before, in fact, I won't even let you finish. I'll talk over you before you finish your sentence to prove that I'm right, you're wrong. But whereas we want to get to levels 4, which is emotion. So now we're going from what we think and what we're listening for ourselves to the other person. So level 4 is about emotion. In the words that people use, the tone, or what they don't say, can reveal the emotion, because we're emotional creatures, right? In fact, we're feeling creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel. So we're driven by emotion. Even the most logical engineering type brains in the world, they're driven by emotion still. And then we get down to level 5, which is listening for point of view. What is somebody's belief system? How do they see the world? How do they interpret it? How do they make decisions? What are their rules, their values? And if you listen, if you suspend your own sense of what's in it for me here and truly listen, people will share their pain points, their issues, their obstacles, their problems, as well as how you can help them. It may be subtle, but people leak like a sieve, even if it's subconsciously, and they will share all this with you. You just got to pick up what's really driving that person. By doing that, you then use what I call an empathy loop, and you simply reflect back your understanding of where you think they're at. Even if you disagree, this is particularly powerful if you disagree with somebody. Is it okay if I just share with you where I think you're at with this deal right now? Well, sounds like you think that actually we're dragging our feet, you're actually not getting value for money here, and actually we don't really see you as an important client. Now, I think you're talking complete and utter BS, but it doesn't matter. I've listened to that emotion, to that underlying frustration in your voice, perhaps. This sense of you need to feel a sense of respect. We take you seriously and how important this deal is. So I'm just reflecting that back in an empathy loop, and then you'll turn around and go, that's about it, Scott. Yeah, you're spot on.
Or what I've seen happen is they go, no, that's not it. It's da-da-da-da. And they just blurt it out what it is anyway, right?
And that's brilliant, and you don't care. Don't care whether or not you are right or wrong. And actually, once you get used to this, if the other side is being a bit reticent in sharing, what you can do, like the advanced level, is you will deliberately share something that you know is false. And it's not manipulation or being Machiavellian, because remember, intention matters here. So say, for example, this scenario I just gave you, if I know this is definitely not the case, I could say, well, from what you've said, it just seems as if you think that we're just taking the mick out of your goodwill here. And if I know that's not true to be the case, you'll go, no, it's not that. It's this. And you will 100% of the time tell me the truth, because you will not countenance a lie with another lie or falsehood. And so once you've practiced this a bit, you've got a bit of muscle memory, you can, as I said, if someone's been a bit reticent to share, just drop in something that you know isn't quite accurate from their perspective, and they will correct you with the absolute stone bonker, laser focused problem or issue. And then you just reflect your understanding of it. And once you've done that, that helps you, the other side, feel seen, heard, and understood.
I love that. That's just one of many, many, many tactics that you use. If people are listening to this right now and God, that's gold. How do I find out more about the tactics, your trainings, connect with you? How do people do that?
Yeah, we'll cover those in the books. My website, Red Center Global, has got some other tools and documents people can find out more information. I've also got an online course people can sign up to, negotiationmastery.com, And also order the book, Order Out of Chaos, book.com, where they can get a load of free downloads and audio programs from that as well. So order out of chaos, book.com probably has more resources for people.
So we're going to put all the links to the show notes in that for people to consume. And yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic because ultimately it's communication, isn't it? What would you say is the biggest mistake that people make when it deals with a high stakes conversation?
Pretty much every single time it's trying to win at all costs, and they try and problem solve too soon. When the stakes are high, the emotions are rampant, there's a lot here, there's lots of overwhelm and stress and a bit of uncertainty, and it's like the pressure's on to close this deal, whatever it is, people will look to try and come up with a solution too quickly. And what I mean by that is time spent in preparation and building those relationships. What I said in step 2 is key. So step 1 is the information gathering and the prep. Step 2 is the relationship building and building trust. And then step 3 is the problem solving. And the problem solving is a tiny, tiny part of it. And what I really encourage people to do in the preparation stage is to do what's called a bunch of 5s. Imagine the palm of your hand, a bunch of 5s. And before every single call with kidnappers, and indeed every business call I have now, every negotiation, the bunch of 5s is simply this. You take the time to work out what are the top 5 challenges, issues, threats, demands, obstacles, problems, questions, whatever it is for you, whatever's relevant, that if you were the other side, you would levy against you. So if you were playing devil's advocate or red teaming, and you were the other side and you really wanted to make life difficult for you, what would you say? What would you do? What are the things you'd throw in, which spanners would you throw into the works? Because by doing that, forewarned is forearmed. Because when it does happen, you can go, yes, I knew this was going to happen. And guess what? I've planned my response rather than emotive knee-jerk reaction, that I can respond objectively, calmly, rationally to this. And actually I can reflect back my understanding. I can work with the person to make them feel seen, heard and understood, rather than me kind of at 30,000 feet gripping the rails with my frustration, anger and disappointment as what's happened there. So that bunch of 5s is great. And an example, a sporting example of that would be Michael Phelps, who's doing his own bunch of 5s. Remember the Beijing Olympics? He was the best swimmer in the world at the time. And, he's got 1 billion plus people watching him in the final, greatest Olympian of all time at that point. And he knew he had the pressure of the world on his shoulders. He needed to deliver. Been doing it a few years at this point. But in his training, his coach, Bob Bowman, had actually utilized his own version of this. And Phelps, in his training sessions, at the end of the lane, the swimming lane in the pool, he would remove his water bottle or would replace it with really strong salt water. Or as Phelps is swimming, he would poke him with a big stick or he'd knock his goggles off. So he's doing all this. It's like training hard so he can fight easy. He's working out what are the biggest challenges that are going to get in the way of him getting another Olympic gold medal. So he gets to the Beijing Olympic final. Phelps dives into the water, and what happens? Within the first second, his goggles fill up with water. He can't see a single thing. But what happens is he stays emotionally regulated. He can ride his cortisol wave because he's already done his preparation. And he swims effectively blinded the whole final, and he wins the gold medal still because he's spent his time working on his own bunch of 5s. So it doesn't matter what scenario you're facing, that principle really applies. It can really stand you in good stead, and it avoids you then making those really big mistakes of looking to try and win, lose at all costs. Because remember, it's about long-term cooperation and collaboration and taking your time to build that trust.
I wonder if the next question I was going to ask you is, you've kind of, maybe it's the same answer, but I was going to ask, what's the biggest blind spot that you believe business owners and senior leaders have when they're communicating under pressure?
They don't tap into or take the time to identify, through level 5 listening, of course, the identity and status piece and of a conversation.
Identity and status of the conversation or of the person they're communicating with?
Both for them and the other person. For example, if somebody comes to you asking for a pay rise and you don't give them one for whatever reason, legitimate or otherwise, the other person, that yes, they'll have the emotions and logic as to why they could probably rationalize that away. But unless you kind of work out from an identity perspective, how are they interpreting this? Well, I'm not going to get a pay rise. Well, doesn't my boss feel that I'm a worthy, capable, competent member of the team? Even though you can't literally financially, you haven't got the money to pay them a pay rise, you need to be able to still identify and meet and be able to communicate those identity and status issues. So in a conversation, for example, would be, you'd articulate you can't give a pay rise, and you would add something about, and yet still you are a really highly valued, competent, valued member of the team with long-term prospects here, and this is how we'll be able to reward you in future, rather than just go, do you know what, the budget can't stretch to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And so leaders, particularly, and business owners need, in any and all difficult conversations, you've got the what it's about, the factual, cold, hard data, like almost as if you're reading a news bulletin. The second part of it isn't the emotions and feeling, which is really, really powerful. But the one that is the foundation to it all is that I said that identity and status and belief system as to how somebody would interpret that conversation, how they'll see themselves in the world.
I love that. You said about the three parts to having those conversations, and a huge part of building the trust is developing that. And I believe that trust is built, not got. You don't just get trust, you build it. What is the length, if you, over the 300 negotiations you've dealt with, which are the real high stakes, it doesn't get much higher stake negotiations that you're dealing with, what's the shortest, what's been the longest that you personally have been involved with?
In terms of those negotiations, well, from the kidnapping perspective, sometimes it's been a couple of hours, and sometimes it's been a couple of years all the way through. And there was one case where the head of the family got kidnapped, very, very wealthy shipping owner, tens of millions of euros in a ransom demand, and the younger brother saw this as his moment to shine, to step into the fold, so to speak. And he wanted to be the chief negotiator, chief decision maker, head of the family, de facto now head of the family. And again, he was really reluctant to take our advice, and he allowed the kidnappers to phone him on his own personal phone rather than using a clean phone. The reason we want to use a clean mobile phone, but the only people who know the number are us and the bad guys, because every notification, every email, every ping, every call from the brother had, he thought it was from the kidnappers. But it wasn't. It could be a member of the family or a colleague or whatever, just messaging, or it could just be normal email. And that was fine for the first couple of days. But as the weeks went by, he became a broken person. He allowed himself to be dysregulated. He was trying to focus on the problem solving. He wasn't really listening. And so we're trying to work with him, but we're struggling. And he turns around on one of the calls to the kidnappers a month or so in, and he threatened to find and kill the kidnappers. Went on full Liam Nielsen on him. And the kidnappers just coolly, calmly turned around and went, no, we're going to kill your brother now, and hung up. And we didn't hear anything for 6 months. So you can imagine like the family dynamics there. And in the end, we managed to persuade a cousin to come in and take over the negotiations, and we got the elder brother back. But that whole process actually took over a year to work out. But interestingly, the elder brother, the hostage, when he came out, he'd been privy to all these conversations. He could hear what was going on. And he really took offense to and had strong words with the younger brother for how he dealt with it. But actually, knowing what I know now, because this was quite early on in my career, this thing around status and identity. yes, we'd covered the logical and the emotion part of it, but we hadn't quite really understood how that younger brother saw himself and the internal narrative, the story, his belief system as to how he now saw his role, and how we worked that out and communicated that to him in terms of we understood where he was coming from. He would have absolutely guaranteed be more receptive to our advice as to what he needed to do and say.
It's so interesting hearing some of even the specific terminology that you're using, identity, and I'm kind of hearing significance and various other things you're talking about when you're saying that, because you and I have a mutual mentor in Tony Robbins, because not just in terms of being influenced by and been to his events, but you also became a Tony Robbins results coach. Was that something that you did whilst you were still actively doing this work, or was it something you did after?
Whilst I was on a case, when we're on a case, we're on a case, could be weeks or months. But then when we came back, we were left to our own devices, really. We were at the end of a phone to get activated, so to speak, to rush off to the next one. And I was on a case with a guy, super experienced negotiator, ex-special forces, hard as nails, you name it, he'd done it. And we're at breakfast one morning on a case. And we just got talking, because a lot of people in special forces, as I'm sure you know, or in high level of sport, it's all about that 2% gains, the improvement, really big into their personal development. And we got talking about Tony Robbins, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's just that loud American guy, isn't he? And the guy who was with, he just turned around and went, I've been to see him 3 times. And I was like, really? You have? He goes, yeah. He goes, he's brilliant. I learned so much from him. A lot of the guys in the forces follow him and all what he teaches. I'm like, oh, okay. He goes, basically, Scott, you need to put up or shut up. You either need to go to an event, read the books, or just stop, quit moaning about it. And I've gone really well with him, but it's quite a real direct conversation. I went, all right, okay. So I went back to my room and I Googled Tony Robbins, and there's an event at the Excel Centre in London like 3 weeks later. And I messaged him. I went, right, I've bought a ticket. So I rock up to the first Unleash the Power Within event. And I'm sat there, and my arms folded. I'm like, I'm an ex-cynical cop, right? Really it needs to be a high level to impress me kind of thing. And everyone's whooping and hollering and jumping up and down. I'm like, what am I doing here? But after about half an hour, I was joining them. I was hugging and high-fiving. And it was a transformative 3-4 days, the firewalk and everything else. And I was like, this is absolutely out of this world. And a lot of the stuff that he was teaching, we were doing anyway, very similar techniques in terms of trying to influence, persuade, and understand what motivated people and our belief systems. But now I could see some of the science behind it. And I then got involved in the fire team. It's basically the group of people who put all the firewalks out. And an opportunity came up, because I was also doing some coaching in between jobs as well, as an executive coach for a number of years as well. Because most of my time was spent in the boardroom or the C-suite, as well as the family on these high-stakes negotiations. And an opportunity came up to go and work for Tony as one of his business coaches and one of his results coaches. And that was just a great experience. That was, probably 4 years or so of doing that. And the selection process was really intense. Like 9 months of probably the hardest training, harder than any kind of negotiation training I've done, to really peel back the layers and the limiting beliefs yourself that you have. It was like therapy on steroids, and it came out the other end. And then we'd probably end up doing 3,500 paid coaching hours in a really short space of time, because you've got the breadth and the depth and the throughput of clients from all over the world, particularly in the business context, where you help them close the gap from where they are to where they want to be with some proven tools and techniques to grow their business and improve the team culture.
Yeah.
And it complemented everything I was doing in the negotiation side of things as well.
What was your biggest personal learning from doing the training, the rigorous training, the 3,500 hours of coaching? What's your personal learning?
2 things. State is everything. Your emotional state. and how you talk. Look, the most important conversation you'll have is the conversation you have with yourself in terms of the language you use. But above all, it was seeking out worthy opponents. And what I mean by that is people who you might label as being difficult or awkward or rude. They're the people where you are going to get your greatest growth and development from. If you can come with the right intention and harness and practice these skills, these tools and techniques in those kind of conversations, it's a great learning curve, and the muscle memory just gets magnified tenfold. So rather than seeing somebody who's been really difficult, see them as a worthy opponent. Not that you got to beat, but you got to work with them to bring about cooperation and collaboration. If you can do that with them, then all the other challenging conversations you have in your life are going to be child's play.
I love that. On the state management piece, you spoke about the importance of preparation with negotiation, and obviously there's certain things that you learn to do faster over time because you get better at it. You mentioned your first ever negotiation with that family and the guy saying they're going to spray it, the shoot you all and whatnot. As you are sticking that siren on top of the car and you're heading there, how do you prepare when you get the phone call saying, right, we've got this situation going on, we need you on the phone in 10 minutes, or you get that phone call, email, someone shouting at you saying, Scott, we need you. How do you prepare in that moment? How do you change your state to get into the optimal state to deal with the task at hand?
Yeah, well, there's three things that actually link in with what Tony Robbins teaches as well, I guess. It's the physiology, the focus, and the language. And so from a physiological perspective, I would get that phone call. And as I said, it was never the convenient time. If I remember once, I took the kids for a swimming lesson, and I got the phone call. I'm like, kids, come on, Daddy's got to go. I've got to get to the airport. And they're like, yeah, Daddy's going to go chase pirates. They loved it. But in that moment, the physiology aspect is, I alluded to it earlier, I actually would just place my feet flat on the floor and bring my attention to the soles of my feet. And by doing that, even if it's just for a split second, it just makes you really super present. And it interrupts the pattern where you may be thinking down that negative spiral or getting stressed out. So I just bring my attention to the soles of my feet flat on the floor. At that point, I'll take a couple of breaths. It could be some box breathing, in for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, and then repeat the cycle 4 times. Or a longer exhale, perhaps. So feet on the floor, breathing, and like, right, just pause for a second, reset, and just notice, okay, what is going on for me? What is showing up for me right now? Is there a churning in my stomach, or a tension in my shoulders or my neck? Almost like getting a balcony or a helicopter view, and just notice what's going on and go, right, what's my next step? What's my next thing I need to do? Right. And then crack on with it, and then you're away and running. So before I would walk into the family kitchen, the hostages family, or walk into the boardroom, the crisis management team in the corporate, whose member of staff are being kidnapped, or even in a normal business setting, I would just reset, just spend a few seconds to kind of gather myself before entering into that meeting, or before going on stage and give a keynote talk. I would just stand at the side of the stage and go, right, feet flat on the floor, soles of feet, breathe, focus, and then away I go. And so what I encourage people to do, you can practice this. So what I did in the early days, I'd set an alarm on my phone 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a day, random times. It would go off, and then for 30 seconds, I would pause, I would reset, and then I would choose the next step or the next action, so PRC. And I would notice, okay, what was showing up in me? And then you start to notice patterns. So every time I sit down in a meeting with that person or about this topic, I get this same feeling. And get curious brings the curiosity piece again. Why is that? What's going on for me? And again, that self-awareness and that self-reflection can be really helpful there. So pause, reset, and then choose.
I love that. And I suppose that I was going to say you do the same at the end of whatever you've done to change the state. But I suppose that end is just the start of the next thing you're going on to. So either way, I imagine it's the same thing.
And even in an everyday, quite benign environment, with back-to-back Teams or Zoom calls or even face-to-face meetings, it doesn't matter how busy you are, you've got 30 seconds. Don't tell me I've got 30, even like 10 seconds. It's a transition time. It's being mindful and bringing tension to that transition. So you finished the one call or the one meeting, just stop. You don't need to check your email in that second or that WhatsApp message or the Slack notification. Just pause, 10 seconds, feet flat on the floor, bring attention to the soles of your feet, breathe, reset, notice what's going on. Right, what's next? That can take 10 seconds. Or you take 10 minutes, depends how long you've got. So the transition, even if you're working from home and you're at your desk, you could still do that mindful transition between tasks. And that almost gives your brain and your nervous system a really powerful super boost of charge to move on, as opposed to just being a hamster on the wheel, training and burning.
It creates separation, doesn't it? That's kind of what I've had. The first time I heard about that was Brendan Burchard spoke about release tension, set intention. And the one that got me was when I pulled up on the drive, and I'll be honest, I haven't done this recently for a while, but I'm going to get back to it on the back of today's conversation, was release tension, set intention. I take a lot of phone calls in the car, I'm busy on the way back, and then I would sort of walk into the house still on that phone call, still doing those things, as opposed to creating the separation. Like you say, if you're back to back, 30 seconds to create that separation. What is a case or a situation that sticks with you in a way that if you wake up at 2 a.m, it comes to your mind?
The case, bear in mind, I sign NDAs on all my cases, so I'll use a case without mentioning the details that sticks to mind, because it could have gone so drastically wrong. Was 6 people have been taken by pirates off a ship. So they've been hijacked, and I was working thousands of miles away on behalf of the shipping company, and there's a foreign government involved. So I'm sat in this tiny embassy compound, and a few days have passed since the kidnapping, and we should have heard something probably by now. And we're using an old phone, an old Nokia mobile phone, we made it clear to the powers that be that this is the phone that the kidnappers need to phone us on. But we don't hear anything. Everybody's getting a bit tense. And I stand up at the table I'm sat at in the room there, and I go and pour myself a coffee. And in walks this mountain of a guy who I'm going to use as the communicator with the kidnappers because of the language and the dialect. And he's a big guy, and he shakes my hand. He's like, "Mr. Scott, why do the kidnappers not call?" And I'll go, "We must be patient. They'll call when they're ready." And I'm thinking, please call. And it's as if the universe was listening, because all of a sudden the phone rings on the table and everybody jumps, and I jump, even though I've done hundreds of cases at this point. So we sit down, and I've already worked with the communicator. I've already worked with him over those couple of days, trained him, coached him about what to say, why we need to say, and how to say, and his outcomes for each call. The first one being, we want to reassure the bad guys, and we want proof of life. So he takes the call, and this voice booms out of the phone. "We have your people. We want $5 million or we'll kill them all." And then they hang up. And you can hear a pin drop in the room. But internally I'm going, yeah, game on. Now the negotiation can really begin. And then over the course of the next few weeks, we get the kidnappers from 5 million down to 500,000. It's a big drop. And the reason we want to do that is because we've paid too much too soon. What messaging does that signal to people? Well, that was easy. And as I said at the beginning, no one likes to leave money literally or metaphorically on the table. So the same principles apply in everyday business. But getting it down to 500,000 over the course of about 3 weeks at this point, it's taking its toll on my good friend, the communicator here. And he's becoming a bit of a broken guy here. He hasn't shaved or showered in days, I know, because I'm sat next to him for 16 hours a day. And then we get another call from the bad guys. And he's like, hey, we need more time. We're a poor company. Please look after these people because they're your responsibility. Because these are his friends here. And the communicator feels as if he's letting his mates down because somehow he's responsible for this. And the kidnappers just turned around and went, no, they're yours. Money by Friday, we'll execute all of them. And I'm thinking, oh, this is not working out as the way I wanted it to. And then the communicator stands up and he brings his fist down onto the table and he turns and he faces and moves towards me. I'm thinking, getting punched by the client is never a good look. And he turns around and storms out. And I'm thinking, right, there's some elements to negotiation really that we need to focus on. The first one is we need to take the initiative and a calculated risk. Any kind of business negotiation, got to take a risk. Be forward leaning on the balls of your feet, moving forward towards stuff rather than shy away. But also I need to seek this cooperation and collaboration. And I think, right, I've got the kidnappers where I want them. They're not going to harm the hostages. They're close to a payday. I've built enough trust with them over the last few months that they're going to be okay. I now need to take a risk, and I now need to work to bring about cooperation and collaboration and rebuild my trust with the communicator, because without him, we're screwed. So for the next 24 hours, I'm doing all of my validation and my level 5 listening and the empathy loop and all of that good stuff. He then comes in the following day, suited and booted and showered, thankfully. And we get on the call with the bad guys and we agree a deal for $300,000. Agreement for the release of all the hostages. Great. Everyone starts hollering and whooping and cheering. And I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, well, this is it. We've got the result. And I'm like, no, the most dangerous time in any negotiation is just when you think you're winning. Same in business, the 11th hour sabotage. You think you've got the deal over the line and something gets brought up that sabotages it. I said, hang on, people, we've got $300,000 on this table. We need to get it into a bag, across the border, out to the kidnappers, goodness knows where, hand it over, get the hostages back, get to safety, all without anything going wrong. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? Let me tell you. So I find a courier, poor soul, for a minimal amount of money, is going to take the money, the bag of the ransom money, and every 4 hours he's going to check in with me because the kidnappers are also checking in, wanting to make sure he's on track. But 4 hours go by, I don't hear anything. 8 hours go by, I still don't hear anything. You can see where this is going. 12 hours, nothing. 13, 14 hours, I get a phone call from the courier. He's been arrested by the local chief of police who got wind of this and is refusing to let him or the money go. So we fly somebody down who's a bit more important than the chief of police, who persuades him to release the courier and the ransom money. Well, most of the money, local taxes and all of that. I think, great, Mr. Courier, you can go on your way again, because the kidnappers are going apoplectic. They think we're ripping them off. We're trying to ambush them. And I'm starting to worry about the welfare of the hostages. But he wants nothing more to do with it, the courier, and he legs it with his cut the money. So I'm sat there, again in a different country at this point, thinking, right, we haven't got all the money. We've got no one to deliver it. The kidnappers are losing their mind over this. How are we going to sort this out? So we managed to find somebody else to take the money. And it's the only time it ever happened, like in the movies. He hires a boat. He goes out to sea to a waypoint. Kidnappers count the money. Pirates count the money. They then hand the hostages over simultaneously. And then they turn around and they do something which I hadn't seen before. And people watching or listening to this, they may think they've got great client relationships or customer service, but they've got nothing on these guys. Because they turn around, the kidnappers turn around and said to the hostages, here's a clean mobile phone. We're going to escort you to safety now. And if you get into any trouble whilst you're in country, give us a call and we'll come and help you out free of charge. And they did. They escorted them to safety so they couldn't get taken by any of the rival gang or intercepted by corrupt police or military. and they escorted them to safety to a hospital to get checked over. And we got them back, and that was a case that pretty much had everything in it that you could think of.
Wow. You've had quite the career, haven't you? You've had a lot going on, which I think now I talk about people living their North Star and wanting to do something that is their life mission. You've had some of them. I mean, you could literally write a book or two on your stories and your endeavors. So before I actually ask you the question about the North Star, if someone buys Order Out of Chaos, what are they learning? What are they gaining from buying and consuming that book?
Order Out of Chaos is very much a hands-on, practical book that if you want to improve your negotiations in the workplace, particularly, what are some of the things? Some things I've covered today in this podcast. They're the practical tools and techniques that people can apply. And the second one, more about is how to make decisions. And I thought, does the world really need another decision-making book? I thought long and hard about it, but I thought, I've got loads of these books at home, but actually, when the pressure's on, am I really going to remember all these convoluted, complicated quadrants and checklists? No, I'm not. So I thought, what's actually getting in the way of people making highly effective decisions under pressure? So went almost pulled the curtain back and took a step back. And that's what that book is more about, how to really make those decisions when it counts, as opposed to having to rely on really complicated checklists. So that's the difference between the two. So Order Out of Chaos is more for the business and negotiation side of it, and Eye of the Storm more for the wider decision making in life generally.
Amazing. Well, we're going to put links in the show notes so people can find out more about them. What's your North Star now? What's your life mission? What's the thing that you're doing, waking up every day, that's lighting you up?
I feel genuinely grateful and blessed to have had this life and all these opportunities. And I'm at the stage now in my life where it is literally sharing those insights, experiences, the tools, techniques with as many people as possible to help them have, ultimately, when you strip it all this back, how can we have better conversations, particularly in a world where everyone is shouting, not many people are listening, and the world needs people, all of us, regardless of your circumstances or your situation, to understand how to have better conversations.
Well, you definitely help people do that, and a huge thank you. One final question before we wrap up. What's one question you wished more people asked you?
Well, that's a good question. Did you know when you started working in the place, this is where your career would end up? And my answer to that would be no. And that's a good thing, because I've got 4 teenagers and they're all trying to work out what they want to do with their life. They want it mapped out. They want the next 40 years mapped out. And I went, don't do that. Don't have a direction of travel, have a North Star, as you write about, Will, have a direction of travel, and just go in that direction. Be guided by your instinct as well, about trying to do the best thing possible. And as long as you're doing that, things and opportunities will appear that you never dreamed possible. And I also think, which links into exactly what got you going in the first place, is follow the curiosity. Yeah, 100%. Follow that curiosity. And enjoy it. If you can be fulfilled in your journey, that's 80% of the way, right? Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. And head to the show notes, go and get the books, check out his courses, the website, everything we'll put in the show notes for people to go and check out. Thank you. Thank you. And for everyone that's been watching or listening, until next time, live a life you love. Thank you for listening to North Star Conversations with Will Polston. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Share it with just one person that you think will benefit from it. My North Star is to empower people to transform excuses into results and live a life they love, and this show exists for that purpose, and you can help make that a reality too. By liking, rating, reviewing and sharing the show, you will help the platform algorithms do their thing and get North Star Conversations in front of more people so they can benefit from it too. Make sure you hit subscribe so you get the newest episodes as soon as they're released. Until next time, live a life you love.